Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Rosecliff. My name is Leslie Jones. I'm the Director of Museum Affairs and Chief Curator for the Preservation Society. And it's my honor to welcome you to our second and final Fellows Lecture of the year, the Jacalyn and William P. Egan Lecture. So our thanks to the Egans for underwriting this wonderful presentation we host annually that our fellows are able to give remarks on the projects they've worked on throughout the year. I'm pleased to introduce to you this evening MaryKate Smolenski and Luli Zhu, who have spent, well, MaryKate has spent 2 years here and Luli 1, working diligently on very important projects that mean a lot to our collections as well as to the future of the Preservation Society. Before we begin their lecture, just as a reminder, we have our other final lecture this week. The John G. Winslow Lecture will be on Thursday, August 11th. We are featuring this year Bob Shaw, who is the Emmy Award winning and now recently Emmy Award nominee for production designer. He is the genius behind the production design for the Gilded Age. So we got a sneak peek of his presentation today, and it's really going to be captivating. It is sold out in person, but we do welcome people to join us on Zoom. This evening, we will be hearing from our two speakers. MaryKate will be joining us first, and then I'll be introducing Luli, who will come second. If you could hold your questions till the end, we'll have someone running around with a microphone so that our friends on Zoom can also hear. Unfortunately, it'll just be in-person audience members being able to ask those questions, but hopefully we'll be able to address everyone's curious minds. Our first presenter is MaryKate Smolenski. MaryKate earned her MA in History and Museum Studies from Tufts University and studies early American history with a particular interest in female loyalists and material culture. And that's what she's actually going off to do after she leaves us. She'll be heading to Boston University to receive her PhD. She has worked with the George Washington University Museum and Textile Museum, the Cambridge Historical Society, and the Newport Historical Society. She also began working for the Preservation Society of Newport County 9 years ago as a seasonal tour guide and is currently finishing up a 2-year research fellowship with us. In 2020, she co-founded the Coalition of Master Scholars on Material Culture, an online platform that shares the work of emerging material culture scholars. And we're so excited to wish her well as she goes off under her new endeavors. And with no further wait, MaryKate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jacalyn and William P. Egan Lecture. I'd like to start by extending my sincere thanks to Jacalyn and Bill Egan for their generous support of this fellowship program. Your commitment to supporting scholarship and emerging scholars is truly inspiring, and I'm honored to present this lecture tonight. Before I continue with my presentation, I would like to take a moment to recognize and honor the fact that I am presenting from the traditional land of the Narragansett people. Indigenous peoples of Newport and the larger colony of Rhode Island and Providence plantations suffered enslavement, dispossession, and displacement at the hands of European settlers. Their stories are integral to Hunter House, which I'll be speaking about today, as are the vibrant cultures of today's Indigenous communities of Rhode Island. I would also like to take the time to thank the many people who made the Hunter House project possible. I'm incredibly grateful to the Preservation Society for funding this project and the Decorative Arts Trust for providing a Dean Bailey grant. We have several wonderful contractors who made this new installation possible, including Sandra Leotis Lighting, Shamrock Electric, Pam Rogers Design, A&E Wall Covering, Fast Picture Framing, and MB Signs and Graphics. Thank you to the Newport Historical Society, the Redwood Library, the Newport Restoration Foundation, the Rhode Island Historical Society, and the Rhode Island State Archives for their assistance and for providing access to their collections. Preservation Society staff have also been invaluable to the realization of the reinterpretation of Hunter House. It certainly takes a village for a project like this, and so I have a few people to thank, including Master Carpenter David Oakley, who made all of the casework you'll see at Hunter House, as well as taking on numerous other projects. Thank you to our collections team, Amanda Quink and Lauren Landy, our conservation staff, Carla Schuler, Diggin Ferrans, and Patty Miller, and our education and research team, Kate Pedersen and Claire Barneywald. Thank you to Leslie Jones for the initial inspirational vision for this project, Catherine Doucette, who is the other fellow who worked on this project, for developing this alongside me last year. And then finally, Nikki Williams, who has been instrumental to the final development of the interpretation and has served as an incredible mentor. I'd also like to take the time to thank my two outside mentors, Ken Torino of Historic New England and Keith Stokes of the 1696 Heritage Group and Preservation Society board member. Finally, as Leslie mentioned, I have worked for the Preservation Society for 9 years. I started as a 17-year-old tour guide over at the Breakers and kind of worked my way through all the properties. And so as I leave to start my PhD in American and New England Studies at Boston University this fall, I just want to say thank you to everyone who I've met at the Preservation Society during my tenure who really made this work even more enjoyable. And I'm glad to have met everyone here. So I'm going to begin with our next slide. So we believe that Hunter House was built around 1748. Newport at that time was not the Gilded Age summer resort that we typically think of. Rather, it was one of the 5 major colonial cities in British North America. The house passed through many owners and has a vast history. I won't be delving too deeply into this, but I'll be focusing more on the process of developing our new visitor experience. If you do want to have more background information on Hunter House, I encourage you go see the new tour or also check out the Newport Mansion's website. My presentation today will cover the evaluation work conducted, new research, creating the new visitor experience, a preview of that experience, talking about beyond the tour and also areas for future research. Unbeknownst to all of us, Hunter House's last public tour would occur in fall 2019, and the house remained closed for almost 3 years. The COVID-19 pandemic would prevent the house from reopening. However, changes were already in the works for Hunter House prior to then. A fellowship had been posted calling to perform a critical assessment of the collection and the history of its site, and to research new ways to communicate a clear and thoughtful guided tour that equally represents the important examples of Newport craftsmanship located in the spaces, while also sharing the significance of the site in our nation's history. Hunter House is part of the Preservation Society's origin story. The house was threatened by demolition in the 1940s, and a group of concerned Newporters stepped in to found the Preservation Society to save and then restore the house. Hunter House was saved because of its roles in the American Revolution, as well as its intact wall paneling. The house was used as the headquarters of the French Navy when the French were in Newport during the Revolution. And as the 250th anniversary rolls around in 2026, it's important to highlight this critical site that can tell many stories about the Revolutionary era. An assessment of the house and its collection would be a great undertaking, and the time that Hunter House was closed to the public would allow for a deep analysis of the site. 2 fellows were selected for this task, myself and Catherine Doucette. We first began to assess the Hunter House collection and the current research. Catherine would complete her fellowship in August 2021, and I would continue on until now. Our first step was to evaluate what had previously done and Hunter House's current interpretation and collection. We began reviewing previous research and tour scripts to understand what the tour content had been for Hunter House. Hunter House had been a guided tour experience that centered its interpretation around the stories of the house's white male occupants and the decorative arts. For example, in the tour script written on the screen, it's from 1986, and it says, Joseph Wanton Jr. active in the sea trade. We know now that this sea trade would involve the transatlantic slave trade. We also spoke with past research fellows who had conducted research at Hunter House, including archaeologist Sarah Salem. We reviewed Hunter House's first public-facing project, which was a 1953 loan exhibition put together by Ralph Carpenter, an enthusiastic collector who was dedicated to preserving Newport's colonial furniture and architecture. He pulled together a loan exhibition that brought together 18th century Newport furniture, paintings, silvers, and more from the private collections and cultural institutions. From the exhibit, Carpenter published a catalog in 1954 entitled The Arts and Crafts of Newport, which has served as a critical piece of scholarship in developing the Newport regional style of furniture. The catalog also reveals the key goals and objectives of the 1953 loan exhibition. Ralph Carpenter's vision for the site, stated in an article entitled Schemes for an Exhibition House, was to make the house into an active, functioning part of community life, constantly interpreting as many sides of the past as possible in terms today the people of today can understand. This was the vision for Hunter House, a historic house museum for the local Newport community, a site committed to researching and interpreting the many different narratives of Newport's colonial history. This would also be our vision moving forward with the house. After examining the previous interpretive material, we wanted to get feedback from the public about the current Hunter House tour. However, since the house was closed due to COVID-19, we weren't able to observe tours and speak to visitors directly. I was able to interview tour guides though, and create an online survey to reach visitors. The information from this helped shape our new interpretation. For example, from our online survey, we saw that an overwhelming amount of people expressed interest in learning about the lived experiences of the house's occupants. 72% expressed the max amount of interest. In comparison, only 57% of people expressed max interest in learning about furniture and craft. We still planned on discussing the skilled craftspeople of Newport and the stunning furniture in the Hunter House collection, but acknowledged this desire to hear more about the occupants, which the previous tours had minimally addressed. When tour guides were interviewed, they also expressed the desire to know more about the families that lived at Hunter House and what their lives were like. With this in mind, we started conducting research. A great deal of my research involved archival material. I centered my research on anything relating to Hunter House's property history and the history of its occupants. I began with the Newport Historical Society, which I knew has an excellent archive for 18th and 19th century Newport history. And after searching through the list of archival material, I found a great deal relating to several ownership eras and visited Newport Historical Society's archives multiple times. There, I looked at government records, wills, account books, financial documents, letters, and more. Since it was such a large amount of material, I would quickly read through the documents and see if they were relevant, and then take pictures to review later on my own computer. I also visited the Redwood Library and the City of Newport's Land Records Office in person. The Land Records Office also has deeds after 1800 digitized, so I was able to use their online database. Digitized records are a huge help as they allow me to view records at home, which is very helpful during the era of COVID-19 when in-person visits were at times restricted. Digitized records from the Rhode Island Historical Society and the Rhode Island State Archives allow me to view bills of sale, censuses, and other documents virtually. One of my goals for research was to look into the enslaved and free Black workers at the house. One document that I examined was the will and probate inventory of Jonathan Nichols, the first owner of the house who died in 1756. This inventory had already been consulted and is mentioned in the 1986 tour script. You'll see in red underlined that the script notes, according to a 1756 inventory of Jonathan Nichols' estate, he owned 2 marble sideboards. So while this probate inventory had been reviewed to examine what decorative art objects Nichols had owned, this document can reveal much more than the old interpretation discussed. New research includes finding new primary sources, but also reconsidering and looking at old sources in new ways. Nichols's probate inventory lists 7 enslaved people: Cambridge, Toby, Joe, Lucas, Phyllis, Maud, and Dick. We must be mindful, though, that enslavers often renamed enslaved people, and they may have used other names amongst their friends and families. And so while we use the names in the inventory, that document might not reflect their true identities. The men that Nichols enslaved worked on his wharf most likely, shipbuilding, outfitting vessels, or unloading cargo like tea and sugar. Enslaved women and girls like Phyllis and Maud would have performed domestic work around the house. And they may have cleaned items like those 2 marble sideboards that were previously mentioned in Nichols's inventory. Looking at a variety of documents can glean different information. Catherine actually examined Newport cabinet makers' records and came across the document that you see on the screen. This is from cabinet maker Job Townsend Jr., and it's from his day book, which was a day-by-day accounting book. And it records that Hunter House owner Colonel Joseph Wanton Jr. purchased a coffin for enslaved Cuff. Cuff was possibly from the Akan people of modern-day Ghana, and in Akan culture, Cuff or Kofi is the name given to boys born on Fridays. And so from that little bit of information, we have a little insight into Cuff's life. The coffin purchase in a cabinet maker's daybook also tells us a little something else, his death date. There are many gaps in the archival record, and researchers must work to fill in the gaps, a great deal of which may be lost to the past. One enslaved individual who we know a bit more about is James. I found this runaway ad for James in the early American newspapers database run by Newsbank. Again, digitized sources are extremely helpful to sort through large amounts of material, and some of these resources you yourself can access at home. I searched through the Rhode Island newspapers, including the Newport Mercury, for any mentions of Hunter House owner Joseph Wanton. And I came across this ad. Wanton placed the ad seeking James's return. It calls James likely, which meant he was promising as a worker, probably strong and healthy. It also calls James very upright, so he's probably tall and carried himself proudly. Over 100 runaway ads were posted in Rhode Island newspapers, and is a testament to the determination of those who tried to escape slavery. Many were fleeing harsh treatment, others were trying to reunite with loved ones, as slavery often separated families, especially in urban New England. This ad also lists what clothing James is wearing, including a red coat and white stockings. Another source that I looked at is the so-called Book of Negroes, a 1783 document created to record over 3,000 Black loyalists evacuated by the British at the end of the American Revolution. As Leslie mentioned, my particular area of interest for research is loyalists, and so I had actually already looked at this document before to find Black loyalist women in Newport. There, I had seen an entry for Bridget Wanton. The document actually has two copies, one in the National Archives in England and the other in Washington, D.C. However, the Nova Scotia Archives has a digitized and searchable copy for researchers, which is where this image comes from. When Hunter House owner and loyalist Joseph Wanton Jr. fled Newport for New York with the British military during the American Revolution, it appears Bridget traveled with him, or there was a chance that Wanton purchased Bridget when he arrived in New York. Bridget was with a baby girl at the time. In 1783, Bridget and the girl appear in the Book of Negroes, which show her age, 22, and she's described as a stout little woman with a small girl, 5 years old. Bridget informed the British that she was formerly the property of Colonel Joseph Wanton of Rhode Island, who at his death left them free. The British only granted freedom to individuals who were enslaved by patriots in an effort to undermine the patriot side, and allowed white loyalists to continue enslaving people and bring their enslaved workers to elsewhere in the British Empire. If someone was formerly enslaved by a well-known loyalist like Wanton, it is likely the British would have inquired to see if they were truly manumitted. This all points to Bridget having proof of her manumission. Wanton's adult daughters were also in New York City at this time and could have easily inherited enslaved Bridget and the young girl when their father died in 1780. If Wanton brought Bridget and the baby girl from Newport, there is a possibility that the young girl was Bridget and Joseph's daughter. Sadly, it was very common for enslavers to take advantage of enslaved women. Bridget then goes on to pursue her own freedom outside of the United States. She and the young girl were on board the vessel William, bound for Abaco in August 1783. Greater Abaco is the second largest island in the Bahamas, and Bridget and the young girl were part of the first settlers to arrive on the island, who sailed on the William and the Nautilus from New York City. The group included about 95 free Black loyalists and 155 white loyalists. This group of Black loyalists were diverse and from a variety of locales. Bridget and her probable daughter were the only ones from Rhode Island. Bridget and the young girl's fate are currently unknown once they arrived on Abaco. Future research may shed further light on their lives. Another source is historic photographs, and I utilized the Preservation Society's archive as part of my research, which has numerous photographs of Hunter House. On the left, you can see an image of from the 1870s, and the one on the right is from the 1940s. Historic photos can help us trace changes to the property over time, such as the addition of the porch or changing of windows. This photograph from the 1870s also shows a few other important details. First, we can see Hunter House's pineapple pediment above the waterside door. It was later removed from the house, and then when the house was restored, it was placed on the Washington Street side. However, this shows that the pineapple pediment would have been on the western portion, facing the water. This image also shows people sitting along the lawn, likely temporary boarders when the house was owned by a steamboat company and served as a boarding house. However, you can see with that second red circle, there are also two Black women in the background, and one is holding a laundry basket. This points to the presence of free people of color working and living at the house, even in later eras. The photo shows the value of close looking at particular images and objects. And we have an 1870s image actually in the house as part of the new tour for visitors to closely examine it themselves. Another image, which is part of the Newport Historical Society's collection, shows Hunter House when it was owned by St. Joseph's Church and served as a convent. In fact, you can see there's a church, there's actually a cross above the doorway there where our pineapple pediment is today. Primary sources are not only documents and photographs, though. They can include material culture, such as gravestones, textiles, architecture, and archaeology. Traditionally, women, people of color, and other minorities have been recorded in limited ways, and the records are biased and incomplete. White men are typically who are the most documented and thus the most written about in secondary sources as well. More often than not, to research these minority groups, one needs to piece together many different sources, read between the lines of the historical record, and there are often gaps in information. Catherine and I also researched the collection of Hunter House. Most items in the house are not original to the property, and so they have their own stories. Physically examining the objects for maker's marks and other useful clues is important. The image you see on the screen is of a silver coffee pot, which once belonged to Robert Johnston, a plantation owner and enslaver from the British colony of Jamaica. Johnston moved his family to Newport in 1833 on the eve of emancipation. He foresaw that the liberation of the island's enslaved population, set in motion by the Emancipation Act of 1834, would undercut his business there. And you can now see this coffee pot up close in Hunter House's orientation gallery. Following evaluation and initial research, Catherine and I devised a plan for the new visitor experience. We also visited and took into consideration other early American history sites and art collections, including Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, the MFA Boston, Colonial Williamsburg, the National Gallery of Art, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In considering Hunter House, we decided to have the new guided tour move chronologically through the house's history and explore various themes. Whereas many historic house museums depict a static moment in time, this new experience tries to be more dynamic and take you through several of its ownership eras and a broader sweep of time. This includes historicizing our own institution, its creation in the 1940s and its work in the 1950s, which was part of the larger colonial revival movement. We also decided to convert 2 rooms into gallery spaces. The former keeping room became an orientation gallery with an introductory panel, a timeline of ownership eras, a central case with objects, and seating for visitors. Guests could peruse the information before the tour, and tours will also start in this space. It provides comfort for visitors, a cool place to sit on a hot day before a tour, and also a place to introduce them to a site that is vastly different from the other Gilded Age mansions. Another room was turned into a gallery space to focus on dining and would allow close looking at objects ranging from Chinese export porcelain to pewter and silver, and discuss foodways in 18th century Newport. The room had previously been inaccurately interpreted as a dining room. In the 18th century, dining could occur in all rooms, and formal dining rooms were not normalized until the 19th century. The rest of the rooms remained period spaces, although some objects would be changed to better tell the new narrative. Catherine and I began to pull together an initial object list when Catherine left for her PhD program. In the fall of 2021, I would complete the object list, deciding what objects to group together to best suit our interpretation. This new interpretation allowed for highlighting some previously overshadowed objects, such as this gorgeous silver and mother of pearl tea caddy from China, and we moved it to a more prominent position in our northeast parlor. Or this silver porringer by master craftsman Samuel Vernon, which is now in the dining room gallery, allowing it to be examined at a much closer distance than the cabinet it was previously stored in. This Newport-made sampler is now discussed in an upstairs bedroom where we discuss female education and shows the skillful details made by a Newport girl, Mary Emmis, who likely studied at Newporter Sarah Osborne School, according to sample scholar Lynn Anderson. Highlights of the collection are still spotlighted, like this remarkable painting by Gilbert Stuart entitled Dr. Hunter's Spaniels. The previous tour noted that this is considered to be one of Gilbert Stuart's earliest known commissions and depicts a contemporary Newport table. However, we can also use this painting to discuss Stuart's connection to the formerly enslaved Neptune Thurston. Stuart is said to have recalled that he learned to sketch faces as a boy in Newport by watching Thurston. Thurston was trained as a cooper or barrel maker, but he also used chalks and charcoals to draw faces on the hogshead barrels he made for transporting goods from Newport to the Caribbean and Africa. Unfortunately, none of his drawings appear to survive. Gilbert Stuart went on to paint many faces, ranging from these sleepy dog faces to his iconic portrait of George Washington on the $1 bill. And it's important to consider the exchange of artistic knowledge between Europeans, Americans, African, and African Americans, which were all part in making Newport craft so successful. And like the tea table you see depicted here, the spaniels in this portrait were also a status symbol in the colonial era. Breeds like these were limited to the aristocracy in England, but wealthy colonists could import these dogs to mimic nobility, and points to the hunters reflecting their upper class status, believe it or not. Next came the implementation and installation of this plan. While working on writing the new tour script, our team went to work to clear the 2 gallery spaces. Furniture and objects were carefully moved and packed to make way for the work that would need to take place. Once the former keeping room was emptied, Sandra Leotis Lighting Design and Shamrock Electric worked to prepare the orientation gallery for the installation of a new light system. The installation was a complicated one. Lighting is always difficult. They just knew. The problem at Hunter House was that there are large beams running inside the ceiling there, making it difficult to run the fibers. And this extended the timeline for installation. Our team consulted conservation staff, the Historic Building Survey, Hunter House's National Landmark designation paperwork, and more before moving forward. Following careful preservation principles, we then had our master carpenter, Dave Oakley, carefully remove key floorboards from the bedroom above the orientation gallery. The electricians were then able to run the fibers over the beams to the required areas. With that complete, they were able to finish their work from down below, and then the floorboards were then put back into place. The orientation gallery and the hallways were then repainted. Dave Oakley, again, our master carpenter, and I will always sing his praises. He's the hidden gem of the PS, but he made all of the lovely casework that you can see some of which in our photographs here. We also designed the layout of the orientation gallery case and prepared introductory text. This text was then installed. Here you can see our vinyl installers, MB Signs and Graphics, placing the introductory text, and a timeline was also installed. So now we have some images of this new installation finally complete. Here is our new orientation gallery with a central case of objects, including that Johnston coffee pot that I referenced earlier. This is our foodways gallery with 3 separate cases exploring food and drink in colonial Newport. And you can really get up close to the porcelain, the pewter, the silver in a way you weren't able to before. The majority of the rooms, though, have stayed period rooms with a few object changes. Here's our northeast parlor. We have a different tea table and a different tea set. And we've also have that beautiful mother of pearl tea caddy that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be on one of the side tables there as well. This space is set up to showcase Newport craft. And here we highlight the gorgeous William Claggett clock and the John Goddard triple top gaming table. On the center table, there are 2 new additions to the house. One is Thomas Chippendale's The Gentleman and Cabinet Makers Director, to show where some of the designs came from. And then you'll also see a saw to the right of it, which once belonged to Newport cabinet maker Robert Lawton and was donated to the Preservation Society by Ralph Carpenter. Here's an image of our upstairs parlor that we now use to discuss the French in Newport, which is one reason the house was saved. And Hunter House really was the center of the French Navy. It was their headquarters, and Admiral de Tournay even died in the house, possibly in this room. And the room includes portraits of Lafayette and the Comtesse de Rochambeau. Our upstairs hallway now includes objects from the Hunter family's time in Brazil, including a portrait of Mary Robinson Hunter done in Rio, and some porcelain from their daughter Eliza's wedding to James Burkhead, also occurring in Rio. On the right side are historic images of Hunter House from the 1870s, 1910s, and 1930s to discuss the later eras of the house. We end the tour by discussing the PS&C era of the house and the colonial revival movement. The space includes 2 of Ralph Carpenter's chairs, which are attributed to the workshop of Daniel Goddard. You can see pictured here. And then our tour ends with an empty frame to signify the research is still ongoing and there are still many stories left untold. Now, there is only so much information you can fit into a 50-minute guided tour, so naturally there's a lot of extra info from my research, and so I've compiled that into supplementary information for our guides and other PS&C staff. These included a supplementary info document, about 10 to 15 pages, with just more background information, then a further reading list, room-by-room inventories, let guides know all the objects in a room if people have questions, and a 100-page guide to the occupants, which includes genealogical and biographical information on every identified person who lived at Hunter House. That's been my little pet project on the side, is just doing a bunch of genealogical research and digging into absolutely every child, which doesn't make it into the tour. But we hope that this will be the new standard for guide education and new research deliverables. And in fact, I have a copy of the guide to the occupants up here if anyone's curious to see what that entails, that you can browse through after the lectures. One interesting story that didn't make it into the tour is the tale of Deborah Hunter. Her son, William Hunter, owned and lived in the house as an adult, but Deborah herself never lived there, so it makes sense that we don't talk about her too much on the tour. However, her portrait is in the collection, and I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about her fascinating story. In 1769, Deborah Malbon Hunter and her daughter Eliza sat for this portrait you see here, done by Cosmo Alexander. Deborah is sitting upright on a leather brass-tacked chair, and her soft blue eyes tranquilly gaze back at the viewer. Her long, curly, dark brown hair is pulled back and ringlets swept to one side of her neck, falling onto her shoulder. She wears a delicate and expensive pink silk dress with lace accents. Deborah's right arm encompasses her daughter Eliza's shoulders, and she gracefully holds Eliza's small right hand. Both of their lips are pursed to form small, gentle smiles, following facial comportment etiquette that dictated colonists look moderately cheerful. Their graceful and very controlled poses, serene facial expressions, and imported silks evoked an image of the colonial upper class and mimicked English aristocracy. However, 18th century portraits were not realistic representations, just like their moderate smiles. They're really trying to create an idealized fiction that's the sitters and the artists wanted to portray. While this painting survives to portray the desired vision and status of Deborah to her family, guests, and later generations, she suffered a much starker reality in her later life. Deborah was born in Newport in 1744, and her father was Godfrey Malbon, one of the wealthiest businessmen in Newport at the time. In 1761, she married Dr. William Hunter, a Scottish immigrant. Marrying Deborah gave William access to her family's connections and social status, not to mention her dower. However, for Deborah, marrying William was a slight downgrade. Regardless, the couple was still considered affluent, and her husband ran a medical practice and apothecary in town. Her husband was a loyalist during the American Revolution, and he died 2 months into the British occupation of Newport. Since Dr. Hunter did not technically leave his property, his estate was not confiscated. So Deborah was fortunate in that. However, she still experienced difficulties as his executrix. People did not always pay doctors right away back then, and he was often paid in notes of hand, which were similar to IOUs. And when Dr. Hunter died, Deborah was left to chase down the money owed to her, totaling over $215,000 in today's money. In 1786, Deborah left Newport with her 2 eldest daughters, Eliza and Anne, who are on the screen here as well, to seek medical treatment for her daughter Eliza, but also to chase down debtors. Many of them were loyalists who had fled to England and then could no longer pay her because they were over in England, so she goes over to find them. Deborah submitted a loyalist claim while she's over there for her financial troubles. However, the British government ruled that since she didn't have any property confiscated, they couldn't reimburse her for that. But they did offer a one-time grant of money for passage back to Newport. But interestingly, Deborah did not take it. Deborah took an active role in her finances, and she worked with her husband's old apprentice, Charles Feek, who was the son of painter Robert Feek. Charles Feek served as an agent for Deborah here in Newport, finding her debtors here, renting out her house and sending her the rent money. She was also an agent for him in London, and she would actually purchase medicines for the apothecary and send them back to Newport. Despite this financial acumen, Deborah's socioeconomic standing decreased. Her and her daughter Anne's letters share their reduced circumstances, and Deborah sold off the majority of her possessions. In 1790, Anne married a wealthy European. Staying close to her married daughter and grandchildren was important to Deborah, as well as Newport was in reduced economic circumstances, and she could actually live for cheaper in London than she could in Newport, which solidified Deborah's choice to stay in England permanently. Deborah ultimately died in a small boarding house in London, a stark contrast to her former grandeur in Newport, where she lived in a large mansion on Thames Street. Deborah's 1769 portrait encapsulates her story. Her prior wealth is displayed in the depiction, a life and status that was lost to her soon after its painting. However, the portrait remained in Deborah's possession. She understood the monetary value the paintings held, reflecting her financial acumen, but also their sentimental value of her lost rank. She decided not to sell the paintings with her other belongings, like her textiles or harpsichord, believing she could send for them to be sold in England, where they would fetch a better price. However, tellingly, Deborah never acted on this in her lifetime, and the paintings remained unsold. Descendants later donated the paintings to the Preservation Society. The portrait had its intended effect on her descendants and possibly modern-day visitors, the representation that she lived a well-to-do life. However, Deborah and Newport's status fell after the Revolution, destroying the lifestyle depicted. If such a fascinating story didn't make it into the tour, imagine the stories that did. You'll certainly need to visit to hear all of them. Now, while I've spent 2 years researching Hunter House, research is never ending and there is much to be expanded upon, and here are a few possible examples for future research. The artist of this portrait of Mary Robinson Hunter is unknown. However, upon further examination with our curator of collections, Nicole Williams, pictured here, there is a small signature on the painting. We can make out that it says Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, July 21st, 1845, followed by an artist's signature. However, it is very difficult to read that signature. So future research into portraitists practicing in Brazil during this time may shed further light. Another area for future exploration is archaeology. Analysis of the archaeological fragments found by research fellow Sarah Salem in 2016, some of which is on display in our new orientation gallery, could yield more insight, and specialists in bones, ceramics, and other materials found could give us more information on what is in the collection. We have also worked with Salve Regina University to conduct GPR, or ground penetrating radar, at Hunter House. Analysis of these scans, along with other future archaeological projects, could give insight to the layout of the Hunter House property, including buildings and other structures locations. Finally, another route for research is conducting research on the descendants of the occupants of Hunter House. Here is a 1976 letter from the Wanton descendant Clive Wanton of New Milton, England. Future research could be conducted on all of the descendants, not just the house owners, but also attempting to trace the enslaved and free people of color that lived and worked at Hunter House. Hunter House has so much history and can tell endless amounts of stories. Research can continue and the interpretation can evolve, and I recommend you come see the new tour yourself. We officially opened on Friday and will be open for tours every weekend through October. Thank you so much.
Great job, MaryKate. Thank you so much. Just going to change our presentation here quickly. Okay, now on to a completely different subject. Luli earned a bachelor's degree in history for cultural heritage studies from Beijing Union University, with supplemental training experience from the craft program dedicated to furniture and interior decoration conservation. She then went on to receive a master's in science and architectural conservation from the University of Hong Kong. She has started a doctoral program at Nicholas Copernicus University, and her research interests have focused on art conservation, especially the wall painting techniques and conservation issues, as well as the cultural communication between Western and Eastern objects. Previously, she interned in the Bureau of Historic Sites in New York State, where she provided supporting research for Asian collections in 3 historic sites, and also took on practical conservation work of objects. She has also held many internships and apprenticeships at prestigious historical sites throughout China. And beginning this fall, she'll be enrolled in the Bard Graduate Center of Studies program in New York City. I should also mention too, Luli was accepted into the program in 2020, but couldn't join us because of the COVID-19 outbreak. So we were very pleased to extend her entrance into the following year. And she is a student of our former chief conservator, Jeff Moore. So we knew that she had been trained well to come and join us for part of this survey. So Luli, welcome.
So, hello everyone, I'm Luli. Thank you for coming to Rosecliff to my final presentation. As my colleague MaryKate mentioned before, I would also like to take a moment to recognize and honor the fact that I'm presenting from the traditional land of the Narragansett people. So today's presentation is based on my lacquerware survey within our collections. When talking about lacquerware, a closer look at the Preservation Society of Newport County. When we talk about lacquer or lacquerware, got it. Okay, got it. Thank you. People probably would get confused about what is lacquer actually. Well, for Asian lacquer, it means made from the sap of lacquer trees. As we can see from the drawing painted approximately in the 18th to 19th century and collected in the National Library in Paris, it is clear to see that those people are cutting the lacquer trees to collect sap, the raw material, then proceed and apply it to objects or buildings. And 2 commonly used terms to describe Asian lacquer, one is qi, also that's how we pronounce it in Chinese. Another is urushi, used to describe Japanese lacquer. For Asian lacquerware, thank you so much. For Asian lacquerware, as quoted from Mr. Wang Shixiang, one of the most well-known and recognized contemporary lacquer experts in China, who interpreted the lacquer techniques book from ancient China, Xiu Shilu, and published his note and interpretation as another book. In the foreword of his book, he wrote, "The art of lacquerware manufacturing and lacquer craftsmanship has been developed by China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asian countries for a long time under the influence of mutual exchanges." I think his words reflect the fact of Asian lacquer. For example, you can easily find similar materials or techniques used in Chinese and Japanese lacquerware, but with different names. Asian lacquerware have a lot in common, no matter material choices or techniques. And just to quickly point out the only existing lacquer techniques book in China, as we can see on the right, it was written in Ming Dynasty around the 16th century by Huang Cheng, a lacquerware craftsman, and contains detailed descriptions of the art of producing lacquer and the ideas that are connected to the art of lacquerwork. About the lacquer tree those people were cutting in the previous drawing, there are mainly 3 types found in recent research. They are Toxicodendron vernicifluum, Toxicodendron succedaneum, and Gluta usitata. With different main components, they grew separately in Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam, Thailand, and Myanmar. From Dr. Maria Zhao's research, who holds a PhD degree from the University of Delaware and focus on Canton export black lacquer with gold, which is one of the most important collections in the PS. This type of export lacquerware was mainly used the second type tree in the 18th century, and after the 19th century, it also started to combine the first type. A very brief history of lacquerware in China from the recent archaeological discovery refreshes the history of natural lacquer used by humans in the Yangtze River area in China more than 8,000 years ago. So started from 8,000 years ago, the Chinese first used lacquer as outer coating of woodware, then applied lacquer on different substrates like wood with fabric, fabric with paper, bamboo, and metals, and etc. They are usually solid and lightweight, heat and acid resistant, and can be decorated with various decorative patterns, practical, economical, and beautiful at the same time. And similar in Japan, urushi began to be used in the prehistoric period around 5000 BC, and the main substrates for Japanese lacquer are wood and also pressed papers. Then what is Japanning? Japanning is a varnish coating used by Western countries to imitate Asian lacquerware. The difference between Japanning and Asian lacquer is that Asian lacquer uses single resin or sep, while Japanning uses multiple ingredients like centric, mastic, coppels, virus turpentines. Resins were commonly mixed, and you can see a Japanning tall clock from our collection in Château-Samer. And also, there are some examples that combine both Asian and Western lacquer. Usually the Asian part was cut from somewhere, or the Western part were added additionally or later. You will hear I use lacquerware a lot in my presentation, and just want to make it clear here that the word lacquerware here is seen as an umbrella word, which includes qi in Chinese context, urushi in Japanese, Japanning in Western context, and they were all included in my survey. And now let's have a brief introduction of my survey project. In 2014, an initial one was conducted by our previous conservation team. They described the condition of 18 objects and also documented 22 Japanese enrolls. While enroll is a traditional Japanese case for holding small objects. And this was the first time that the Preservation Society started to really look at our whole lacquerware collections. Inherited and based on their hard work, the interest in lacquerware was reignited by our new conservation and curatorial staff. And that's how my project came. I expanded the scope of our lacquer survey to 69 objects in total, and the 22 enrolls, which are in pretty good condition, put in an acid-free box and probably stored in a climate control storage space, were not included in our survey at this time. Basically, this covers all of our lacquerware collection that we are aware of now. The survey is a combination of on-site work and off-site research. 5 houses were chosen to conduct on-site surveys. They are Chepstow, Château-Samer, Kingscote, the Elms, and Marble House. And due to important factors such as unstable signal and lack of Wi-Fi on site, I developed a relatively simple plan to conduct the survey efficiently with the help from the Conservation Department and suggestions from other museum colleagues. Simple and easy carry tools like flashlights, UV lights, and magnifier were used. As you can see here, I used the 10 times magnifier to observe the ground layer, the substrate from cracked areas, and it worked really well. 2 data collecting tools were used. One is Google Survey and the other one is PDF. By creating both customized Google Survey and PDF form, all the details of each lacquerware can be documented. And after documentation on site, then I use Excel and the automatic data analysis tool from Google Survey to analyze the collected data. By creating the PDF form, it's easy for me to work offline on my iPad everywhere in the house and easily take photos through the iPad. Now every lacquer has its own survey file. A brief introduction of the PDF form. It contains 5 parts, from basic information, visual examination, current condition, to cultural information and further study. 13 pages in total for each object. For basic information, which contains not only the accession number, type, dimensions, all the basic information, it also contains accurate locations such as if it's close to the window, that would give us an idea about the cause of some surface deterioration. And technique types and manufacturing place are also documented. For most of our objects, there's no record or no reliable records, and very little research has been done on those lacquerware before. So this survey contributes to determine the provenance of the piece, or at least gives a starting point for further research. The second part is visual examination, which collects information on substrate, joinery techniques, rounds, lacquer, and surface decoration. Here are some joinery techniques I draw for better references on site. And all kinds of joinery techniques can be observed on site. And please remember the dovetail here. We will see it again later. The main body collects the information on the current condition, from the substrate to lacquer and surface decoration, varnishes, hardware, other materials to previous treatment, detached fragments, and overall condition. So basically, it contains every detail of the object's condition, and we evaluated the degree of different deterioration they have. 2 different criteria for individual parts and overall conditions were created. We use major, intermediate, minor to describe the extent of damages, and also combined with visualized photos. And we use poor, fair, good to describe the overall condition. This criteria helped us to visualize the overall condition of the entire lacquerware collection, and those categories can be easily visualized, be put in Google Survey and Excel. The 4th and 5th part are cultural information and further study. This part was added to contribute as much as possible, and I hope it will be useful for knowing more about our objects. Now let's have a look about what we know or what we have in our collections based on my survey results. First is the location distribution. Within the 5 historic houses, the lacquerware collections can be found everywhere as a popular type of decorative art or collection. Among them, Château-Saumur and Kingscote have the largest collections. Almost 70% of the lacquerware is in Kingscote and Château-Saumur, which also related to the strong connections between the 2 houses' owners and China trade historically. For Kingscote, China trade merchant William Henry King bought it in 1864, and until the last owner, Gondola Ella Reeves Armstrong, passed away and left it to the Preservation Society in 1972, the King family owned and lived in it for over 100 years. And Château-Saumur was built by the China trade merchant William Shepherd Wetmore, who went to Canton during 1833 to 1847 and built Château-Saumur in 1851. Some lacquer collections are originally from the Wetmore family, but due to auction like in the 20th century, like the one in 1969, there is not a lot original lacquerware belonging to the family left in the house today. Next, let's have a look about the object types. By dividing them into 3 general types, miscellaneous, decorative object, furniture, and tableware, it is easier to see that the distribution. Around 62% of the collection are objects, including boxes, specifically functional boxes like cigar box, gaming box, in rows, small clocks, and fans. And 29% are furniture, including like sewing tables, nesting tables, cabinets, or other normal tables. And almost 9% are tableware, like bowls, teacup, and etc. For techniques, more than 80% of lacquerware collections are divided into Asian lacquerware catalogs. And the surface decoration techniques are various too, but most of them are black and red lacquer, For both of them, the most common surface decoration materials are gold and polychrome painting. Techniques like inlaying, incised, raised, and carved are all over the place. Specific techniques like black lacquer with gold, Japanese, Karamondo, or we call Kwancai, Japanese marquee, and Cinnabar lacquer, or we call Tihong, can be found in Preservation Society's collections. And here is just to give you an overall sense of it. As we can see from the color distribution on the charts, red means poor and yellow means fair. Just to point it out that fair doesn't mean they don't need treatment. Instead, they need scheduled treatments, and poor means they need urgent treatment. On the left, the structure shows relatively fair, but on the right, the lacquer and surface decoration is not in a such good condition. Almost 36% are in poor condition, and only around 15% are in good condition. This is not surprising, as UV filter to the windows have only been recently added or renewed, and most of our objects are on permanent display. A lot of surface deterioration is caused by UV damage, caused by UV light. And lacquerware itself, especially the export lacquerware, is very fragile due to the quick producing industry and material choices, probably. And from our survey, Chinese export black lacquer with gold usually have a very unstable surface with cracks and some losses. An interesting phenomenon is, as we can see from the left chart, that 20% of our survey objects have been treated before. And from the right chart, as seen in the red part, more than half of them had inappropriate treatment. And just to point that out, this is not attributed to our former conservator. And this is nothing, yeah. And here comes to our final recommendation part based on what we evaluate from the survey form. As we can see, more curatorial analysis is definitely needed, as well as further treatment and detailed statement report for conservation works to an individual one. And among our 69 objects, 62 out of them are on display, meaning 90% of our lacquerware collections are on display, and most of them are on permanent displays instead of being rotated as a common museum practice. And 12 objects locations need to be changed. 22 objects need conservation treatment, and 7 out of them need urgent treatment like consolidation of actively flaking surface. Now, since we know better about our lacquerware collections, let's have a close look at some special ones. This is a lacquer dressing case, my favorite. From our curatorial database, this lacquer dressing case was written as a Chinese export ware around 1860, and is a bequest of Mrs. Armstrong in Kingscote. In seeking to know more about this case, I went through our paper files, and from the old inventory file in 1972, I found it was documented as an early 19th century Chinese lacquer dressing case. It's not a normal or typical export type, like sewing tables or nesting tables. And after a searching and literature review, I haven't got the chance to find a similar one yet in America. And while I was observing and visually examining it, I felt it is really full of Chinese elements on it, like the carved ceiling decoration on the front 2 doors and all the auspicious patterns around. But the weird thing is the joinery techniques and those little turning elements, those little balustrades. By asking Western furniture experts suggestions, they all said those joinery techniques are very Westernly made, but in a weird way, like this dovetail joinery. So I started to look back at Chinese lacquer dressing case history and forms. From the Warring State period, around 400 BC to 200 BC, lacquer dressing case first appeared. And during the Han Dynasty, they changed from single tier to double tiers with mirror on top, usually quite light, and most of them are wood or cloth substrate. When developing to Ming and Qing dynasties, there are three main types. The first is a classical mirror box inherited from Song dynasty, small folding with mirror all in one box. And the second type was influenced by like larger, like by screen and armchair, those larger furnitures, usually with backgrounds like mirror laid on the backboards. And the third type is called guanpi, xiang guanpi box, usually as dovry, similar as the first type, but has doors in front, which can be locked with a lid as a safe box and handles on two sets, convenient to carry or move around. As you can see on the right, it is a black lacquer with gold dressing case in the Palace Museum collections in Beijing, typical type 3 guanpi box. And if we put our dressing case into these three types, it's a kind of a combination of type 2 and 3, but more like type 3. And when we look at our case, 2 tiers, black lacquer with gold decoration on drawers, mirror on top, lay on the backboard, doors in front and can be folded, handles on each side. Ceiling on the front doors, auspicious patterns around, not very specifically as a female topic, but sort of related. I was questioning ceiling at the very beginning and then figured out it also has good wishes for more kids, more descendants. Also from an old painting, a photocopy of this painting was requested by Mrs. Armstrong, previous owner of our dressing case in 1969 from Peabody Essex Museum. We can see in this painting that there is a dressing case on the table with a mirror. The lady dressed as a normal Han people in Qing Dynasty. We don't know if Mrs. Armstrong collected those photocopies to know more about her dressing case or the China trade history, but through her letters, she did have a lot of communications with different institutions and museums talking about the portrait she had, which is upstairs now, and other China trade objects. She was definitely interested in that time period history. And when we look closer at the painting, another interesting part is the background. As I zoomed in, there are bottle-like balustrade, probably an arched wall and a part of a Chinese pavilion. This is exciting because the combination of Western architectural elements like Baroque and Renaissance influences with Chinese can be found everywhere in Canton's 13 factory areas or Hong Kong and Macau back to that time. For example, like this painting, the view of the front of the homes at Canton. See the balustrade on the second floors, the balcony areas. Also this one, the new China Street at Canton. Balustrade elements can be seen everywhere, and also this private garden can give us a sense that the combination of the balustrade and the Chinese pavilion. A set of Jinggua's drawings of daily Canton scenes in the 19th century also shows us clearly this combination. Another painting I found, like, as we can see, the balustrade elements on upper floors here. So is it possible that the painting's background was 19th century Canton area? I think, yeah, it is possible. And another oil on canvas painting in around 1835 shows us the location of the dressing cases. Like dressing cases usually were made for women who can express their elegant aspirations or auspicious meanings like prosperous descendants. And from the Chinese cultural motive and meaning point of view, lacquer usually represent a soft, dignified, and subtle aesthetic. When we look back at our dressing case, the case itself is like miniature building at that time. The balustrade decoration on the second tier may be influenced by Western architecture, and the joinery techniques look like somebody tried to practice but did not come out with a very good skill. So is it possible that the case was made in Canton by a Chinese craftsman who wanted to combine Western and Chinese and then came out a piece like that, or vice versa? Materials can give us more answers So if we can conduct material analysis on the lacquer in the future, we will know more, definitely. And probably you will hear more stories of this case in our future interpretation. And now let's have another look at Coromandel screen in Château-Semer third floor storage room, consisting of 8 panels, brown lacquer with polychrome carving. We also call this type of technique as 款彩. After a close look, I found it was a birthday gift. On its one side, with auspicious decoration, the outside circle is full of various precious utensils and dragon-like patterns. And the center is carved with a daily life scene, as if celebrating something. The guests are bringing gifts to congratulate. Well, it was popular during Ming and Qing Dynasty to decorate Coromandel screen with a certain topic like 郭子仪祝寿图, a specific theme to celebrate longevity for birthdays. But we are not sure yet if our screen like referenced this topic. And then when we look at the other side, here are some explanations for the theme of the first size decorations. The back side was carved with Chinese characters, also followed the same decoration system on the other side. The difference is on this side, the animal changed from dragon to ox and the other rare and mythical animals. And different ox can be seen on the bottom. And here comes to the most interesting part, the Chinese characters. They are written in Wenyan traditional Chinese, and from reading them, I found it was a birthday gift from a group of people to a lady who has a title from the Qing Dynasty court, and this was usually granted by the rulers to the mothers or wives of high-ranking officials. Her last name is Gong. She was 70 years old at that time, and it was made in the Qianlong period, Qing Dynasty, the first month of the lunar calendar, the year 1793, which was the year of the ox. A group of people who gave this screen as a birthday gift together called themselves 寿夜门人, to show respects. I need to bring something out here that I made a mistake while translating her last name into a wrong character. And thank you all for the people who found it and kindly pointed it out to me. The character is a combination of 2 radicals, long and gong. And the upper part means dragon, but overall as a character, the meaning is nothing related to dragon. And then when we talk about the dragon-like patterns it used, the mistake I made also reflected that I subconsciously connected dragon with a radical of her last name and thought since it was a customized one, it should have some connections. But it was popular to decorate screens with precious utensils or mythical animals. So I would rather leave this as an open topic for future discussion now. Unfortunately, the condition of the Coromandel screen is not very good. From the survey, we can tell that the surface decoration is in poor condition. Major and intermediate decorations are deteriorations are like losses, cracks, shrinkage, and lifting from ground layer to lacquer layer. The hardware connected to the 8 panels are not in good condition as well, same as the previous dressing case. For those objects, if we want to interpret their interesting backstories, the next step should be to conduct detailed condition reports on them, move them from the windows to avoid further color decay, and come up with conservation treatment plans. But actually, we are taking steps now. For example, we are adding climate control system in Château-Semer, where it contains almost 40% of our lacquerware collections. And that's all I want to share today. And I will continue my journey in lacquerware research in the future. And I will start, as Leslie mentioned, a graduate program in material culture and decorative arts at Bard Graduate Center in New York City later this month. And you are most welcome to send me emails for further discussions or point out places I ignored or made mistakes. And here comes to some special thanks. Thank you, Jeff and Morrow, for being my family in the US. Thank you, Leslie, from the very beginning to work with me on difficult and complicated visa issues to the academic and professional research and daily life help. And thank you, conservation team, for providing me a warm home, Patty, Carol, and Dagan. Thank you for cleaning up a huge space for me in such a crowded studio. And Carola, thank you for the months you spent with me on site. And Nikki, Lauren, Amanda, Claire, and Kate, thank you all for your help during work and also for hanging out and exploring Newport with me. And thanks to the other fellows, and wish you all a bright future. And thank you to all the other PSNC colleagues for all of your help. And most importantly, thank you to my parents for supporting me to do whatever I want and go wherever I want in the world. And thank you to my cherry aunt and fat uncle as well. So thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy our talks and have a good night. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Luli. MaryKate, do you want to join her? So I think you'll agree those were two very different but very fascinating presentations. So thank you for all the hard work you've done. We have a moment for a few questions. So if you'd like to raise your hand, I will pass the microphone around over here.
Thank you, MaryKate. My name is Tim Phelps. I'm a Hunter descendant. Thank you. I learned a lot from your lecture, and I thought I already knew a lot. My question is, do you know the names of individual enslaved people who may have lived in the house with the different owners? And specifically, do you know what happened to Dr. Hunter left 2 enslaved people in his will? And did they ever live in the house we call the Hunter house?
Yes, absolutely. So multi-step answer. So for the first 2 heirs of the house, Jonathan Nichols owns the house 1756 and 1748 to 1756. And we have those 7 names that I listed in the probate inventory from the Nichols. From the Wanton era, which is our next era, we have, I believe, 8 names, although one is an unnamed woman. We do have 8 specific names. And if you go to the new Hunter house, we actually have all the names we know on the timeline. We have both the owners, their children, and then all the known enslaved individuals. Now, during the Hunter era, I haven't been able to find evidence of enslaved individuals during William Hunter's era. As you mentioned, there are 2 enslaved individuals in his father's inventory, Quash and Mark. And I have a feeling they ended up with Charles Feig staying in the apothecary because that's probably where they were working. There's no mention of them in Deborah and Charles Feig's letters, but that's just my idea. Deborah does mention a woman named Bridget in her letters who may have been an enslaved woman that went with her to England. I'm hoping to do more research on that in the future. But William Hunter at Hunter House, we find free people of color. At that point, slavery is starting to kind of get abolished in Rhode Island, although gradually. And so we do find free women, girls, and men working in the house, still in the domestic work. They show up in the census record, which at that time doesn't list specific names. So we just get, one woman between the ages of 14 and 26. But we do find their presence there, but there are free people of color at that time. When William Hunter goes to Brazil, though, when he's the charge d'affaires, they do have enslaved and free Black people working in their household in Rio. And Mary Hunter's diaries, which are at the Newport Historical Society, talk about several of them, including Roberto, who's given to Mary at age 6 when they arrived in Rio. If that answers your question.
Very thorough. Thank you, MaryKate. Anyone else? Yes.
So I wanted to know a little bit about the relationship between the Wanton Lyman Hazard House and the Wantons in the Wanton House. So maybe you can help us on that.
Yes, absolutely. So the Wantons are a very old Newport family. The first descendant that comes to Rhode Island is Edward Wanton, and then there's a ton of different branches that go out. And so the Wanton Lyman Hazard they're distant cousins of the Wanton family that lives at Hunter House. Now, most of the Wantons are Quakers, so they're going to be a Great Friends Meeting House. However, the lineage that's at Hunter House is the few that break, and they actually go to the Anglican Trinity Church. And so that's one way to distinguish them from their Quaker cousins, but eventually the Wantons there, I think, also leave the Quaker church at Wanton, Lyman, Hazard, which is part of Newport Historical Society's property, so distant relatives.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you for supporting our fellows program as well. MaryKate and Luli, we wish you the best of luck as you go forward as students again. I don't know what we'll do without you, but certainly your work will be a lasting legacy. So thank you again for all of your contributions to the Preservation Society.